I would tell you to stop playing hide and seek at night, but honestly, just don't play any games at night on the REZ. I'll tell you why. It's something that my grandpa told me one time when we were playing hide and seek at night. More like in the evening, just us cousins, running around grandpa's yard like we always did whenever we would go over. I remember it was getting late. The sun had started to set, and it was going to be getting dark in just about an hour or so. I was crouched behind the shed peeking, trying my best not to laugh, when I heard the back door creak open. Grandpa stepped outside. The shed was right across from the backyard door, so of course he saw me peeking my head from the distance when he came out. He stood there for a moment, watching us. Then, in a serious tone, he asked what we were doing. My cousin, who was counting facing the outside wall of the house right by the front door, said, "We're playing hide and seek," and he even asked if he wanted to play with us. Well, as I kept looking, I saw that my grandpa didn't say anything at first. He just looked towards the yard, including me. He then said out loud for all of us to stop what we were doing and come to the fire in the yard. My grandpa always had this ritual to get all his grandkids together by the fire and talk to us the day before we left back home. A tradition that I miss now that I'm grown. But nobody argued. We respected our grandpa, so we all came out of our hiding spots. I came out behind the shed, one of my cousins from inside the shed, another from inside the house. Cheater, I know. And another one from a tree. Pretty good hiding spots if you ask me. So we gathered around the fire pit while he threw a few more logs down, and he told all of us to sit. He let out a sigh, first saying how it's so good to see all of us, and that he's actually glad that we all came, and that one day if Creator grants us the time, we will be in his shoes as well, understanding and passing everything to our children as well. Then he got quiet, and he stared into the fire for a long time before speaking. I remember one of my cousins. You know how obnoxious young boys are. Well, he was like, "So what's up? What you gonna tell us today?" I remember he said that we have so much to learn, and that he wants us to learn something tonight, before we end up leaving tomorrow. He started off by saying that he was gonna tell us a story, but it wasn't gonna be a story like any other he's told us before. He said that the story was about our great-great-grandpa. It's been passed down through each generation, but he was waiting for the right time. He said our great-great-grandpa Gary. By the way, he said that wasn't his name. However, at the time that Gary was here, because of colonization and assimilation, is that many of them no longer had native names anymore. The government only documented quote-unquote American names. Many natives who got the privilege to being raised around their own culture still ended up getting their indigenous names during a ceremony. So he said that when Gary was around the same age as us, he was taken to one of those boarding schools, the ones that would take your hair, your culture, your language, everything. That's what Gary had said. Keep in mind again, this is my great-great-grandpa. So this was mostly around the early 1900s, at the peak of boarding schools, when the motto was literally, kill the Indian and save the man. The places were at some church schools, nuns. The priests, the teachers abused the young boys and girls, to the point where some girls would get pregnant, and they would have to leave the boarding school. But I won't touch on that today. Gary described the boarding school as old. They made the boys cut their hair. They beat them if they spoke anything other than the English language. They were forced to sing Christian hymns in English. They would have to march to school, military style. Gary said despite everything going on, they still found good morale in the mixture of their own people. Of course, they would still speak their own language. Sometimes they would get caught, but that didn't prevent them from talking in secret. So Gary said that there was a basement under that school, off limits, and the kids were not allowed to go down there. Not just because the teacher said so, or as Gary called it, the military staff, but because other kids spread rumors, saying the bodies of kids were kept down there of those who were punished. He said one night, a few boys decided to play hide and seek around 10 p.m. when they assumed everyone was asleep. They said it was just for fun. Said something about not being afraid. I guess they had to find something fun to do. They would always play this game once a week, always having the same places to hide at. And I guess the exciting part was not only hiding from the person looking for them, the seeker, but from the actual military staff as well. Of course, one of the boys had the bright idea of hiding in the basement. Why? It was always the same spots where people would be found. In the bathroom, under a bunker bed, under the covers, or just trying to avoid the seeker by moving around. Gary said most of the kids didn't want to go down to the basement, but one of the older boys convinced them, so they all went through a small closet where the basement door was at, and they crept down the steps, keeping the basement door open to let some light shine in, and so it wouldn't close by accident. He said the school was a mixture of early light bulbs, and even some oil lamps. Even though the boarding school was hell on earth, this one was government funded, so they had some access to light bulbs. Gary said it was dark down there, but after a few minutes, his eyes were adjusted. The older kid who dared them to go down there also went down there with them. Gary said it was about 7 or 8 of them. At first they were creeped out, but then it was just a normal basement. The moonlight actually helped a bit. There was one of those basement windows in the corner of the room. Gary said everything was dusty, full of boxes and crates. They were all giggling, smirking, and having a good time, laughing how the seeker was not going to be able to find anybody, and he was going to get so mad. Everyone was looking for a spot to hide in the basement, simply because they knew that maybe one of the military staff might see them and come inspect, but also in case the seeker came looking for them by any chance. Gary said that he was starting to look in different places to hide, but someone was already there. After a few minutes passed, he started hearing footsteps above in the halls, so he said this was his sign to just hide anywhere. So he ended up picking a spot behind some crates. Again, one of the boys was there giggling, and so Gary apologized, and he said that he couldn't find any other spot. Gary then asked the boy if he thought the seeker will actually come down the basement himself and look for us. The boy was still trying to hold in his laugh, and then he told Gary that this was his favorite game. Gary told him that it wasn't his favorite, but what else could they play and have some fun if they were not allowed to play the games that their parents showed them? That's when the boy asked Gary, "Who are we hiding from?" One of the other boys that was also hiding whispered back, "If y'all don't shut up, he's gonna find us." The boy then whispered back, "Why? Shouldn't we be hiding from the other one? The one who is living down here?" Gary then said that he got confused, and he looked at the boy, and that's when he noticed that he wasn't wearing one of the army uniforms assigned like the rest of them. His smile was still frozen on his face, giggling again. I'll tell the next part of the story tomorrow. It's getting kinda late, and it's getting dark, but if you didn't guess by now, the story has to do with playing hide and seek. Shit, don't even play any games at night. As a matter of fact, just go to sleep instead. So you shouldn't play some games at night on the REZ, especially at night. But why in the REZ? Can these things happen if I'm no longer on the REZ? They can. They're actually already happening, but people don't notice because they have become numb to these things. There's always something going on the spiritual side of things that people will not notice. I'm not saying that this always comes with playing games at night, but these actions do open doors and lets other things in. So anyways, my grandpa was telling me the story about his grandpa Gary, how they were down there hiding. The boy whispered back to them saying, "Shouldn't we be hiding from the other one?" As Gary looked at him, he noticed that he wasn't wearing the same uniform as them. He then saw him smile, and that's when the door at the top of the basement stairs slammed shut. When it did, all the kids scrambled, shouting, calling out to the others. It was dark, and everybody gathered by the window where the moonlight was coming through. As they all got together trying to figure out what was going on, they all heard somebody speak, "This is my favorite game." Gary said that after the boy said this, he began to count down. At least that's what he assumed, because it wasn't in some language that he knew of, not even in the English one that they were being taught. That's when they all decided to run towards what they assumed the basement door. Throughout this whole time, the other boy was counting. They went up the small steps, but they couldn't open it. They started screaming and banging on the door to help them, and that's when they heard the voice of the boy behind them. "I found you." Gary then said that they were all banging on the basement door, yelling at this point, but they couldn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices above. Gary said that's when the room began to change. The small window with the moonlight, it started dimming. Even though the moon hadn't moved and now it was becoming pitch black inside. And the worst part, Gary said they saw the stairs they came down, fading away, to where it was just a wall now, or something that looked like one. One of the boys screamed that he saw a door on the other side of the room, and so they ran towards it, and when they did, it wasn't even there anymore. Gary then said even the floor felt different at this point. He wasn't sure if it was real, or if the fear was making him imagine it, but the air started feeling thicker as well, like the walls were closing in slowly. The voice echoed, "Let's finish the game." My grandpa said that Gary didn't know the word for it back then, but later, when he told him the story, he said it was some sort of portal, a place between here and the other side. That's when Gary panicked. He closed his eyes and tried to remember a prayer, not the ones they were forced to learn. Yes, at these schools they were taught Christian hymns and songs as well, but he started saying the prayers that he was raised with. He began to speak them out loud, and he told all the other boys to follow his lead. They all closed their eyes, held hands, and started praying. And then, silence. The basement door creaked open. It was one of the military staff leaders. There was so much light coming in. The boys didn't even waste a second. They ran, falling up the stairs, crying, screaming, pushing past each other to get out. And standing at the top of the stairs was the seeker, the one that they left behind. The military leader who opened the door stood beside him, arms crossed, with her face pale. And Gary said that's when things got weird. The teacher was demanding to know where the hell they'd been at, why they went into the basement, and why they were not asleep. The boys tried to explain. They tried to say it was just a game, but that didn't work. And their friend who was the seeker, he said that he didn't know what to do after 2 hours had passed and nobody was saying anything. He had already given up and even went back to bed. He said after a few more hours he assumed maybe something happened since nobody had showed back up. Well, to their beds, right? And so he decided to go tell one of the military staff. Gary swore it was only a few minutes, 10, maybe 20, but the clock wasn't lying. When they saw it in the office, it was around 4 in the morning, and like always, there was no sympathy, no explanation. They all got punished, of course. They got beat with the belts that the staff always had. No food, no water. They weren't allowed to speak to each other for the next 2 days. They had to clean every hallway of the school while everyone else got to rest. That was the way it was. But Gary said that none of this was bothering him, except for what came after did scare him. It was one of the boys who had been with them in the basement. He came back, and after their punishment was over, he would sit on his bed. He didn't cry, didn't talk much, but at first nobody really noticed. They just figured he was quiet from the punishment. But then he started acting weird, different. His whole demeanor had changed. Everything. And sometimes late at night, Gary said that he would see him standing up, sitting up in the bed, cross-legged, facing the wall. Anyways, it's getting kinda late again, and I'll finish telling you what my grandpa said, and the reason he's telling us this scary story. Not to scare us, but to try to teach us instead. To this day I have never whistled at night. I haven't said the word that will come for you. I haven't even said that word, the one that everybody knows not to say. But something that I have experienced that scared the fuck out of me is one night when me and my buddies were playing cards. Despite my grandpa warning us not to do these things, I didn't listen to everything. I'll tell you how I learned the hard way after I tell you what happened with Gary at the boarding school. Remember, this did happen on the REZ. So one of their buddies that went down there to the basement with them, he started acting different. And Gary said that one of his bunk buddies was asking what was wrong with him, and he would just smile. That was it. He didn't talk much after that. He wouldn't answer. He would just sit there with that same grin. He would actually be humming some sort of song. And then, one morning, he was just gone. His bed was still made. His shoes were still there. But the boy was actually gone. The rumor started spreading, and one of the military staff members said that he most likely just ran away, that it happens all the time. That was it. No search, no letters, no announcements. It is true, it was very common. Kids would go missing, and they were simply marked as runaways. There were no reports filed, no prayers, no goodbyes. Gary said deep down they all knew he didn't run away. It was like whatever they had found down there in the basement, or whatever had found them, had something to do with it. But Grandpa did tell me as we gathered around the fire. That's why I don't ever want you to play hide and seek at night. Some games were never meant to play in places where stuff happened. That basement, it wasn't just a room. It was an entryway. He said all the things that happened in that school, the cutting of hair, the taking of names, the beatings, the silence, and the abuse, all of it left a mark. And in some places, where everything piles up, it doesn't just disappear. That's why when someone dies, we don't just clean it up and act like it didn't happen. My grandpa looked at the fire. All the bad energy, it stays behind. The fear, the sickness, it stays. It clings to the walls, to the air, even to the dirt. That's why our people don't mess around with houses where someone passed. We burn cedar, we bless the ground, or we simply don't go near it. He then pointed at the dirt by the fire and said, "Now imagine this, a lot of children who died scared, angry, alone, without their names, without ceremony, without any way back home. Some of them died afraid, alone. Some died with anger in their hearts, grief, shame, everything torn from them. That basement, it wasn't just haunted as some of you will think. It was full of bad energy." And that was the story that my grandpa told us. Now, as promised, here is my story that made me remember everything that Grandpa told me. I was in my 20s. Maria and her boyfriend Patrick had come over to visit Carolina and John, and I was there with my girlfriend Steph. I guess what do you call it? A triple date. We were all close back then. Maria had picked up some beer and a bottle of vodka on the way. We spent a few hours catching up, laughing, eating, just hanging around the kitchen like we always did. Eventually, we sat down at the kitchen table to play some cards and crack open a few beers. Nothing fell off at first, not until Maria pulled out the vodka. That's when you could see Carolina just tense up a bit. She didn't say anything right away, but I saw the look in her eyes. She later told us that John didn't do well with hard liquor. She said that he would act different, mean. I didn't really believe it then. I should have. And now it makes sense why that was her reaction when Maria pulled out the bottle. We played cards for a while. And then, things started to feel a little bit strange. Carolina even mentioned that it just felt cold all of a sudden. I noticed it too. I think everyone was sort of tipsy at this point. At least I thought. Apparently John was full-blown drunk, but he still seemed like he was good at playing it off. But then it happened. I kid you not. John fell back on his chair. We all laughed and jumped up when he did. And Carolina and Maria both said if he was okay. And he just started mumbling. Yeah, I think that's enough for him, as he was struggling to get up. But then suddenly, John got dragged. I swear, he moved a few feet. Everybody saw it because the women screamed, including my girlfriend. He then got up. Well, not really. He simply turned over. He got up on all fours and looked around like an animal. Then he started growling. We panicked. My girlfriend grabbed my arm. Patrick was already moving. We all ran upstairs and slammed the bedroom door shut, shoving the dresser in front of it. All of us were trembling. From behind the door, we could hear John downstairs. And then, something else. Something even worse. There were other sounds. Whispering, laughing. It sounded like he was having a conversation with himself. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and finally some silence. But just as we thought it was over, John started slamming against the door. He was only about 5.5 feet tall, and he weighed maybe around 140. But he nearly pushed that heavy dresser back with all 5 of us bracing against it. We didn't say anything. He then stopped, and we heard him stomp back downstairs. We sat there, trying to figure out what was going on. Then, out of nowhere, his voice came again, right outside the bedroom door. He was asking why we were hiding, why we wouldn't come downstairs. He said he and his buddy were waiting to drink with us. Then, he called out to me. My nickname is Rue, by the way. He said something that scared me to this day, and even now I still hear it in my dreams. He said, Rue, come play with us. Me and Gary are waiting for you. We didn't respond. We just stared at each other. That's when Patrick said not to say anything or even pay attention to it. After about 2 hours, the house went quiet again. Not hearing anything, we finally opened the door, creeping downstairs. John was sitting at the kitchen table, but he wasn't laughing anymore. He was just staring. His eyes were locked on one spot on the wall, silent. We didn't say anything. We just backed away and left. We walked down the road to the neighbor's place and didn't look back. Carolina left them within a month, and to be honest, none of us blamed her. But the weirdest thing, John's behavior didn't stop. Nobody ever got in contact with him again. My grandpa told us so many more things, but I myself am getting old as well, and I simply would like to pass the following to you. Why do people tell you not to whistle at night, not to play games like hide and seek when the sun goes down? You're not just playing a game. Let this be a warning, not just from me, but from the ones who came before me. Don't mess with things that you don't understand. Have you heard about stick Indians? We were told about them as young kids to kind of keep us in line. The memory is kind of foggy. Some people say that they are spirits of the woods. Some of them say that Bigfoot could be considered a stick Indian. People don't really talk about them because it can attract them. They are extremely feared, even among elders. Well, not really feared, more like feared in a respectful way, if that even makes sense. Not all tribes have them, but the local tribes here in the Seattle area believe in them, similar to how the Skinwalker evil witches are from the Navajo REZ. I had 2 encounters with them. Not really personal encounters, but I've been in the area. One of them was when I was younger, and the most recent one happened a few months ago. The first one I'm going to tell you about was when I was a teenager, but the main thing is to always pay attention where you're going, and not walk alone in the forest or in the woods. They will try to get you lost so they can take you, and you won't be seen again. They even copy voices so they can get you to follow them if you're not paying attention. The first time I was about 15, we were up near an old trail that led to a spot used for sweat lodge ceremonies. It was me, a few cousins, and some other girls and boys from the REZ. We were all just messing around, not really taking anything serious. We were just excited to get away from home for the weekend. We were walking tall pines and thick underbrush, and even though it wasn't nighttime, the forest made it seem like it was already dark. 2 of the girls started lagging behind. They were sort of goofing off, tossing pine cones and laughing. The rest of us kept walking towards the lodge, but after a while, someone said, "Hey, where are they?" It turns out that they had gone off the trail, following what they thought were our own voices. They swore they heard us calling them, telling them to hurry up, and they kept following, but they ended up quite a distance from the path. Some of the older guys were the ones who found them. They were just wandering along the tree line. One of them said it looked like they were about to step into a small pond nearby. They called out to them, but the girls didn't respond at first. It took a few tries before they snapped out of it, almost like if something had them in a trance. One of them kept saying, "We were following y'all. Y'all were calling out to us." But no one had been behind them, and no one had called out. Well, at least not in this area. The elder who was with us, a sun dancer, he pulled them aside and smudged them right there on the spot. He told them to sit down and not speak until after the ceremony. One of the older men that was with us said it was the Stick Indians. He told us not to talk about them, especially not by name, and definitely not to follow voices, no matter how familiar they sound. So I guess it wasn't a direct experience, but it still happened around me. Now, I eventually moved out of state, but sometimes I would go to Washington to visit my mom. A few days after I got there, my daughter, who was around 7, was asleep on the couch, and she said around 3 o'clock in the morning, she heard the bathroom door open, and she heard something run by her. When she looked around, she saw a very small black shadow peeking at her by the staircase. She was so scared that she turned her phone on to the music, and she got underneath her blanket. Suddenly, her music stopped, and she heard the phone being thrown off the nightstand. The other thing she said is that she felt paralyzed. When she told me all this the next morning, I knew what it sounded like, and I started remembering and getting that same feeling that I got in the woods. So naturally I told my mom it was a bad idea. She reached over and popped me on the side of the head. "You must have been talking about them," she said, "or you were thinking about them too much. That's why they came." I did try explaining that I wasn't even thinking about them, but she did cut me off real quick. She started yelling at me right there in the kitchen. She said that's what happens when you open the door with your mouth, talking about things that are better left alone, especially around little ones. Then she got quiet, went to her bedroom, came back with her smudge bowl. She burned cedar. She started praying over the doorways, and she told me to keep my mouth shut for a few days, not just about them, but about anything strange. By the way, she was being serious. She said words are power. And so that night, around 3 o'clock again, I swear, I heard footsteps in the hallway, like a kid that was walking, only my daughter was asleep beside me this time. And something else that my grandma also mentioned when I was a kid. She said don't make eye contact. They can bring you sickness. If you don't believe me, go down to the river, down to a stream, and talk about them. They will come up and see you at night. Thanks for listening. There's places you should avoid at night, especially on the REZ. If you grew up like I did around very traditional parents, I know they told you, especially when grandma came around, to never be out at night. But the other thing, and I don't know how true this is, maybe you heard it before, is something that my own mom told me. She said to avoid any areas of water at night. She said that the spirits roam around rivers, creek beds, lakes, basically among those places of water. And so that's the worst thing you can do around here at night. She told me these things because of something that happened to her. She said she was a big party person before I was born. This story takes place around western South Dakota. She told me that her and her friends were coming back from Hot Springs. This was back in 1978. They were driving back to Oglala down Highway 18, just a little east of where the Prairie Wind Casino now sits. If I can remember, it was late August, early September. They just crossed the bridge over the dry riverbed there. Someone had the call of nature summon them, so they all stopped and got out to do their business. When they pulled over, just passing the bridge, my mom said it was very quiet, no wind, nothing, just the sound of a nearby river stream. While waiting for the person to finish, they started hearing something running down the road towards them. My mom said it sounded like a dog that was running on all fours, but then it switched to running on two legs. It was definitely some kind of dog, and it was getting closer. She said her friend finished and they started rushing to get back into the car. That's when somebody started screaming about red eyes running down the road, and they started hearing some wet breathing. They all get in as something slams into the rear of the car. They speed off, with whatever is chasing them running alongside the car. One of them said it was Bigfoot, but with an elk head and curly horns, glowing red eyes, and long finger hands with claws. At this point they're all scared, but when they get to that Slim Buttes Road turnoff, whatever was behind them, it stopped, and they started running down the opposite road. The next morning after they sobered up, they tried to put together everything that they saw, but some of them were even scared to describe it. And so with that, they refused to go back to Hot Springs for a bit. The story scared me as a kid. I was about 5 or 6 when she first told me. The last time she told me about it was a few months ago, before she passed on. She reminded me of a bunch of things. She said not to go around any areas that had water at night. Apparently the spirits like being around there. Everything is so new, so I think helping me tell her stories actually helps me feel better. So hopefully the lesson is learned for everybody, to not go around any lakes or rivers on the REZ. I heard a story from a Navajo couple that I got to know. The husband told me that they were driving at night one day, and they passed by a woman hitchhiker at night. They slowed down to pick her up, but he said that they got a good look at her, and they said that she looked strange and scary looking, so they didn't pick her up and kept driving instead. It does sound fucked up. Like imagine you hitchhiking and a car stops by to pick you up, but then they see you, they give you a face, and they drive off instead. A lot of people are lucky they didn't have phones or social media back then, but I get it, cause I would have done the same thing too. So as they drove off, the woman looked in her side mirror, and she said that she saw the lady running behind her car. She then freaks out and the man sees her too, and he also freaks out. That's what happens, I guess. Karma, maybe. I doubt it though. So they sped up faster and were able to get away from this lady, but they were both shocked at how fast she was running. A few minutes the couple lost her, and they were finally able to get home. That night, when they were about to go to sleep, he said they heard banging on the door, and when they turned on their outside light, they saw that same lady they passed on the highway. They began cussing at her, and they even called the tribal police, who came hours later. Not surprising. They said the woman just stood outside for almost an hour there, before walking off into the field. When the police came to investigate, and they went to go look where the woman walked off to, all they could find was big dog tracks leading away, which was strange because the couple didn't own any dogs. They said they aren't sure if it was a Skinwalker, but how was the woman able to find them all the way over here where they lived at? A friend of mine told me a story about one night at their grandparents' place. She lives out in the country where the nearest house is about a half a mile away, but it's always a family member who lives nearby, so there were never any worries about kids being kidnapped or anything bad like that. It was during the summer and they had a family get-together. The kids were left home alone while the parents helped at a ceremony not too far from where they were staying at. Like I said, you never had to worry about anything happening because everyone knew everyone, and the kids were pretty mature to take care of themselves. One rule the grandmother always had was never to play outside after dark. If you had to go out, there had to be 2 persons and they should always stay near the house. The houses on our REZ didn't have running water or electricity at the time, so whenever you needed to use the bathroom, you had to go to the outhouse, which was pretty far and people always had flashlights for these reasons. This evening the kids decided they wanted to play tag in the dark, but they used the flashlights to tag the other person. They went out and started to play. There were at least 7 to 10 kids ages 7 to 13 playing, and 2 of them shared one flashlight. The only person who had their own was the person who was tagging. They played a few rounds and then it started to get really late and dark. Some of the kids said they wanted to go home, but the younger girl of the group said that she wanted to play one more time because she didn't get to hold a flashlight or play the tagger. They all agreed, and they also said that because she's being a crybaby, they were going to make the last game difficult for her, to which she would find a great challenge and fun as well. They began to hide here and there, behind cedar trees and old trucks or down ditches. Some of them went as far as to climb into trees and hide, because they thought it would be fun to jump out and scare the little ones. My friend then said that he could hear his cousin counting to 10, and then called out, "Ready or not, here I come." He was one of them who hid in the trees, so he could see her light flashing as she went out searching. At some point, he lost track of her light, and he began to get tired. It was taking too long for her to find them, so he just climbed down and started walking back to his grandmother's house. When he got back, he saw his other cousins as well, and they all said that they thought she came back too. Then one of them said that they heard a girl crying, and the crying was leading back to the house, so they thought it was the little girl crying because she couldn't find anyone. They noticed everyone was home, except for the little girl, so they went out looking for her. A group of kids were told to run to the ceremony grounds and bring back the adults to help them search for her. The search began to get tense as they tried to follow the footsteps, but it was hard to distinguish because there were so many from them playing around. When the adults came back, they began driving around and shining their headlights at high beam. They drove quite a distance when they noticed the yellow flashlight on the ground next to a shoe. They went to check on it and looked around, and that's when they noticed the body on one of the tree limbs. They found the girl, but she was all scratched and bruised. Her hair was a mess with pieces of bark and juniper in it. She had dry tears on her face as well. They woke her up, and she looked very confused. She didn't cry. She just looked up and went back to sleep. They took her to the hospital and waited for her to recover. The adults thought that maybe one of the wild dogs attacked her, but she didn't have any bite marks. Then they thought that maybe she did it to herself, but it was obvious that some areas of her body had bruise marks that were fingertip larger than hers. When she recovered fully, they questioned her. She said that when she went out to find them, there was a light leading further from where they were playing. She ended up following it, thinking it was her cousins. That's when she saw a little girl behind a tree and thought that maybe it was one of her cousins, so she went to catch her. When she got closer, she noticed that the girl was not dressed in normal clothes. She had on animal fur, from what she said, and she wasn't speaking English or Navajo. It was grunts and whistle noises. Then she said it grabbed her hard and pushed her. By then she was scared, so she said she tried to tell it to stop, but it kept grabbing her and pushing her. That's when she ran. She ran and found one of the trees her cousins usually climb. She knew it was well, so she climbed as high as she could. She said that this thing was below her, and it was just grunting and whistling at her the whole time. After a while, she closed her eyes and said she heard it go quiet, and that's when she fell asleep. The parents ended up having a ceremony. The medicine man said it was one of the Anasazi girls that she had encountered, which could actually be true because there was a small settlement found nearby in the canyons where they lived. All that existed there was a stone wall and some broken pottery. Such places are forbidden and should never be disturbed. Even after all this, the medicine man told everybody to not talk about this situation and to forget that it even happened. This was told to me back in 5th grade, so I don't know if it's true, but I know for sure I will never play in the dark. Not at 7 or 70 years old. Don't go out in the REZ at night. I've never been a big fan of camping. For some reason or another, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property. We had permission from the owner on the bank of a small lake in the American Southeast. The lake wasn't very big. It was about 50 to 150 yards across. I'm not great at estimating distance, by the way. It was more of a deep pond, but it was about 5 times as long as it was wide. And from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization. We were about 5 to 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. It definitely was not easy to access. However, the road was gated and locked. The owner gave us his code. We pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. If you've ever been down south, you'll know how quickly it gets isolated outside of cities. Our cities are small and the people around often live rough and wild. We have some dense woods that are so thick that they're not even worth building in, unless you have some connection or attachment to the area. I heard it was not profitable to cut roads through it, back when they were building highways in the 50s. So there hasn't been much development that has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places, basically since the Civil War. It's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come upon cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see stars and hear the sounds of nature. We were at our small camp, simply looking around and enjoying the night, when suddenly, my buddy sat up real straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sat up slightly and said, "It's most likely just the darkness playing tricks on you." But he actually seemed shaken and said, "No, look, there's a bunch of faces behind the trees now." This got my attention as I sat up fully, rubbing my eyes to try to gain full focus. And then I saw them, small, round, white faces staring back at me from across the lake. Maybe about 15 or 20 of them. All of them were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees, and only their heads were visible. The best way I can describe the faces are like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or getting high. We were too young for that. Not for at least a few more years. We had already ate dinner at home, and we were just planning on going to sleep after chilling outside for a while. The faces weren't moving. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes would adjust eventually, and that I would see that they were just a reflection of bugs or owls or something. But that would never happen. I stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and then they were gone. All of them. My buddy started to tear up a little bit when he said, "What the fuck were those?" And I didn't have a good answer. None of us slept peacefully well that night. This experience definitely made me dislike camping. I tried to do some research on the internet, but I never found anything that could explain what we saw. Thanks for listening. This is said to have happened a long time ago, maybe back in the 20s or 30s. This story is about a Navajo man who was working as a ranch hand for a rich Navajo who had a lot of horses and cattle and sheep all around the western part of the Navajo REZ in Tuba City, Arizona. One day, he decided to go home to see what his relatives were doing, somewhere past Shiprock, New Mexico. So he talked to his supervisor and asked to take leave, and he was going to go home to see his family. So he packed a good horse and started off his long journey home early in the morning, cross country through canyons, mesas, and open country. Somewhere along the way, he stopped for a rest stop, and while he was resting, he spotted an old mangy coyote sitting on top of a hill not too far away. He took out his rifle, aimed, and fired. The coyote slumped over and didn't move again, so he climbs up to see his kill, and there, laying before him, he couldn't believe his eyes. The dead body was that of a young Navajo man with long hair. His body was half human and bottom half animal. The upper part of the body was painted with designs and his lower half was coyote. He had shot a Yenagloshi. It must have been resting like he was when he shot it. He got scared and didn't know what to do with it. He walked around and he saw a deep crevice along the edge, so he dragged its body and threw it down, only hearing its body hit somewhere deep down in the dark crevice. As scared as he was, he decided he needed to distance himself away from it, across Chinle Valley and over the big Chuska Mountains. He rode all day and into the night, pushing his horse to the limit. He was finally able to make it across the Chuska Mountains and past Shiprock to a relative's home where he told him what happened. He told him to never go back to his employer and to stay there because the relatives of the Skinwalker would sure be looking for answers and be out looking for him. Several months passed, and one day he felt safe enough to come out of hiding, and there was a ceremony happening somewhere around Shiprock. He decided to attend. When he got to the ceremony, there were many people in attendance, camping, and with their wagons parked here and there. And just as he was beginning to enjoy the ceremony, there was an old Navajo man walking around among the people, talking out loud. The old man was saying they were looking for a son who had gone missing a couple of months ago. The old man was telling everybody about his son's journey and where his son had last stopped and where he was last seen. He said he had gone missing after his last known location and never showed up at the next stop. The old man was describing exactly the young Navajo and the area of the REZ where he had shot it. Next, the old man says, "And there is one man that knows what happened to our son, and he is here among you today. We are camped over there, and we would like for you to come over to our camp and tell us what you know about what happened to our son." The guy knew the old Navajo man was talking about him, and somehow knew he was in attendance at the ceremony. He said he left the ceremony as quickly and quietly as possible, and he stayed hiding for many years at his home. He said he never went back to work for his employer over on the western part of the Navajo REZ, and he stayed home. After many years later, he finally came out of hiding, and he told his story to only a few people that he trusted. He said he never went back to the western part of the Navajo REZ. You may ask, how did the people find out this was the man? Well, when the old man announced his search for his missing son at the ceremony, it wasn't a coincidence. You see, Navajo ceremonies serve as channels through which communication with the spirit world is done. I won't go too much into detail, but there are ceremonies where prayers are offered, tobacco, invoking the assistance of spirits for guidance and clarity. Through this process, secrets, revelations can surface, shedding light on mysteries and revealing the truth that's hidden beneath the surface. There's also the communication with elders, as their experience and connection to the Navajo traditions and medicine provide valuable guidance. You see, they have the knowledge passed down through generations, enabling them to decipher the signs and messages from the spiritual side of things with wisdom and discernment. Let the story be a reminder of digging into things that are beyond our understanding and the way of the choices we make. Within the Navajo tradition, encountering a Skinwalker can possibly bring a curse onto your life. So let this be a reminder to be careful respect the cultural beliefs, and be mindful of the unseen that exists in the world around us. I was always a solitary kid growing up. I grew up on the outskirts of my little town that I grew up in and never really had any friends. I would hang out with someone here and there, but for the most part, I stuck to myself. Even in high school, I found time to invest in hobbies such as fishing, hunting, and playing cards. I used to always love a game of spades with my parents and little brother. Even though I loved all the hobbies that I did, hunting was my favorite. I would go hunting on all sorts of critters when it was in season, and I would spend hours just to hunt something. You see, the fun part of it wasn't the fact that I just killed something. It was the fact that I had outsmarted the animal. I now had a trophy to signify my victory. Nothing would come close to the feeling that I would get when I came home with a fresh kill under my belt. I would spend days out in the wilderness to hunt, and I would get lost out there with nature, with nothing but the sounds of the other creatures that filled the woods in which I was choosing to steal life away from. Due to my love for hunting and fishing, I never found time to do schoolwork. I passed all my classes with at least a C, and I graduated high school, but further education was not something destined for me. I was convinced hunting was my calling. After high school, I began to go hunting, not just for pleasure, but for work as well. There was a company close by to my hometown that made deer jerky, and was looking for hunters that could get the meat. Of course, me, the self-proclaimed lover of such activities, applied for this position, and after a week of waiting, I got the job. I was to begin as of right then and there, so I grabbed my gear and went out to the woods and set up shop in the tree stand. The same tree stand that I had been using for as long as I can remember, and I began to wait. I must have sat in that stand for hours, because soon the sun was beginning to set. It was summer though, so I knew I had some time before I was shrouded in darkness. And that's when I saw him. There was a male buck. It got into view all the way on the horizon. I sat there watching it, mesmerized by how it was moving. It calmly paced the forest floor, bending over here and there to eat some grass or berries, until finally it came to the creek that I had set my stand up near to. It stood for a moment. It looked around and dropped its head to take a much needed sip of water. This was it, the moment that I had been waiting for. I raised my rifle, knowing I had only one shot, and I aimed at it directly behind its front shoulder. I took a deep breath. My shot was perfect. It traveled directly through the buck's heart, and it killed him on the spot. My heart swelled as again I knew I won. All this waiting was not in vain. I nearly flew down the steps to my stand and rushed over to the buck. His eyes were still open. I was glad it was instant though, so that he wouldn't have to suffer. I picked him up and soon I was back home. I called the company and soon they had someone come over to my house and pick up the latest kill. I thanked the man as he left and shut my door, feeling more proud than ever. I knew that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life, or so I thought. A few years passed and I continued doing what I loved, and eventually I received enough money from hunting that I moved away from my hometown and moved to West Virginia, as I heard that the hunting there was great. I wanted to live out in the backcountry, as I wanted to go hunting all the time, and I found a place where I could do just that. There was an old cabin, not too expensive, and it sat right there in the forest, not too far away from a town, maybe a 15 or 20-minute drive, so not completely isolated. I liked it, and I made a couple of friends in town as well. Most of them like hunting, but only one ever wanted to come with me to go. His name is Brian. Brian's a good guy, so we got along well, and we gone hunting a few times. The only difference between us is that he's got a full family, wife, the kids, even has a golden retriever. He's a lucky guy, I'll tell you that. He's a good shot too, and I'm glad he's my hunting partner. I had set up my tree stand maybe a week after buying the cabin out in the forest, and maybe a month after that is when Brian and I first went hunting together. We sat up in that stand for hours, waiting for something to turn up. Eventually, a doe did show up, and we did our thing and carried her back to my cabin. At this point, I had already learned enough about the making of jerky to know how to do it myself, and with the help of Brian, we skinned the doe, and we began making jerky and steaks. We would go hunting maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, but I would go hunting almost every night. At this point, I had found another company somewhat close by, maybe an hour away, that again needed hunters to gather meat. So once again I applied and got the job. Everything seemed to be going well. I was good at my job and it also paid well. Almost every night, I was always up in the tree stand for so long, so I knew just about every sound in the woods, from the elk to mountain lion screams, all the way to foxes and coyotes. You give me a noise out in the woods and I could tell you exactly what animal it is, and sometimes even tell you the gender of it. That's what made this night so different. Like always, I was up in my stand, and that's when I heard it, a scream. I played it off like it was nothing, because it was most likely nothing. Except this time, the scream was different. It sounded similar to something I heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Brian was with me and he also couldn't figure it out. Most of the time we don't really care about these noises, as it's not exactly our business to worry about every little sound we hear in the woods at night. However, this noise was just wrong. Something was not right with this scream. Something was not right about it. And after a good 10 minutes of sitting through it and thinking through every animal it could be, Brian and I decided that we would go check it out. After all, we were both armed and had good shots, and if it was a mountain lion, we figured it would run away as soon as it heard us coming. We got down from the stand and began our walk towards the direction of the scream. After a minute or two, we could tell we were getting closer because the noise was just getting louder. It seemed to echo throughout the trees, and I'm not gonna lie when I say it freaked us both out a little bit. However, we continued on, and after another minute of hiking, we stumbled upon a clearing, where we saw where the noise was coming from. It was a huge elk, standing in the middle of the clearing, just screaming out into the night. We looked at each other, and through the look on Brian's face, I could tell he still shared the same uneasiness that I was feeling. We turned to look at the huge elk, still screaming, and deciding to let it be. We walked all the way back to the stand. After some back and forth, we decided it would be in our best interest to call it a night and just go home. When we hunted at night, Brian usually stayed in the guest room in my cabin, as it was always late when we got done, around 2 or 3 in the morning, and he didn't want to wake up his children or his wife when he got home, so he would crash at my place. However, even though we were far away now from the elk, it seemed like it was following us, because the screams were just as loud as ever. This did kind of freak us both out, but we figured if we went to sleep, it would all be over in the morning. So we did. However, it wasn't the ending. When we woke up, the scream had disappeared. Brian said goodbye, and he left for his home. I did the same routine. I went into town and waited until dusk before going back out into the woods and into my stand. I was still a bit unnerved from last night, but I figured this would help me get my mind off of it, and it did. That was until midnight, when I heard the scream again. This time, however, the scream really sounded wrong. Like, really wrong. I could tell this was not the same scream from last night, but again, I couldn't tell what type of animal it was. I hoped and prayed that it would go away, but it didn't. The screaming continued on and on until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what the hell was screaming in the dead of night. I set out in the same direction as last night, expecting for the worst to be awaiting me. I continued through the underbrush until finally I reached the clearing from the night prior. What I saw this time shook me to my core. There was no elk, like I had expected. Instead, there was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing, facing away from me. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. I'll admit it, I was fucking terrified. I had never seen something like this before, and I was ready to book it away from there. I didn't want whatever this thing was to see me though, so I backpedaled as slow as I could, staring at this thing for as long as it was in view. As soon as it was just on the horizon, it stopped screaming. I froze and thought, why did it stop? I wondered. I stood there in the trees, dumbfounded, staring at this fucking 8-foot tall creature that had just been screaming in the middle of the woods. I realized now what a fatal mistake I had made by not running home as soon as I saw this thing. As I was standing there, it turned around, and my body was struck with fear. Even though I was at least 300 yards away from this thing, I know it was staring directly at me, and it knew that I was there. Its yellow eyes were piercing into my heart. As it got down on all fours and began screaming once again, it started galloping towards me. I stood there frozen for another moment before booking it. I knew all the shortcuts to my house, and I took every single one of them. Knowing that I didn't have much time left, I started sprinting faster than I ever had, hearing its echoing cries in the distance, its growing intensity only proving I was going too slow. As the sound grew louder than ever, I saw my house. I fumbled with my keys to get to the one that opened my front door, and as I reached the porch, I found it. I unlocked the door and shut it as soon as I got there. The cries, the screaming, whatever the fuck it was screaming right outside. And I knew whatever this thing was, it was at my front door, walking around, searching for what I assume a way to get inside. Terrified, I hid in my freezer, where I hoped the smell of meat and ice would help mask my scent to this thing. After a few minutes, I heard the sound of glass breaking. Then, the sound of footsteps. This thing had found its way inside my house, and I could hear it moving around upstairs, tracking any signs of me, I know. I did try texting Brian to get over to my place, but my messages didn't go through. And given that it's 3 in the morning, I doubt he was gonna see them anyways. After about 30 minutes of not hearing this thing anymore, I got out, freezing, but I feel like my body was ignoring all that, because I was too focused on trying to figure out if this thing had left. I sat there in the basement all night, aiming directly at the door, waiting to see if this thing showed up. It never did. I eventually fell asleep on the floor. The morning came. I woke up, and I noticed that the door to the basement was open. My heart fucking dropped. But I'm still here. So what happened? I'm not sure. But I will tell you what happened the days after. I ended up moving and selling that fucking house. As much as I love the outdoors, ever since that experience, I fucking moved out and never went back to living in the woods again. Everything happened so fast. I told Brian. I know he probably didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I moved out. I moved to a whole other fucking city, and I will never go into some woods again. A few days ago, I packed up my car and made my way to an Airbnb that I actually rented a few miles outside of Andrews, North Carolina. I live and work just north of ATL, and just felt like being in the city was draining what little bit of sanity that I had left. Most of my team, including myself, had switched to working remotely from home due to COVID, and since I live alone, I was starting to feel the mental toll of staring at the same 4 walls of my cramped 1-bedroom apartment, day in and day out. A lot of people were struggling with the transitions to working from home, so the overall production went down, and the workload seemed to be piling up, more than we could keep up with. Project after project, they kept getting dumped into my lap, and since we're all cooped up inside all the time at home, I didn't feel like I could escape the crushing weight of all this added stress. One day, I felt that I had reached my breaking point. I submitted a time off notice to my supervisor. I booked an Airbnb and decided I would spend a couple of weeks near the national forest. I figured if I was going to be isolated, I could at least use a change of scenery. I had always enjoyed hiking and camping as a kid. In fact, moving to the big city for my job had always felt a little bit out of character for me. I was excited to reconnect with nature and enjoy everything that the park had to offer. I figured that because of all the lockdown restrictions, foot traffic on the hiking trails would be minimal, so I would basically have most of the woods to myself. The weather was supposed to be nice and cool for most of my visit, without being unbearably cold. Perfect for wandering around in the forest, fishing, bird watching, or whatever else I felt like doing. I left around sunrise and arrived at my rental shortly before noon. The cabin was well sized, and it was rustic but appeared to be well maintained. I retrieved the key from the lockbox near the front door, and I made my way inside to get settled. The cabin was quite a bit larger than my one-bedroom apartment in the city, but somehow it felt much more welcoming. I walked into the bedroom and took in the breathtaking view from out of the panoramic window that covered the back wall. Miles of forest for as far as the eye could see, gently fading into shades of green and gray, underneath the trees that only allowed scattered beams of sunlight to peek through. I thought about laying down on the bed with one of the books that I had brought along with me, but I decided against it. Given that the day was still young and I was excited to go exploring, I had gotten rather lucky in finding this cabin rental. Not only was it secluded within the national forest, but one of the features that was on the website was that there was a private hiking trail that started right off to the side of the cabin itself. Several of the reviews that I read before booking said that the trail was scenic and captivating. A few miles in, the private trail would eventually dump out into one of the public hiking routes, but according to the reviews, no one had ever had a stranger come into the private trail and end up near the cabin. I laced up my hiking boots and headed out into the trail. Beautiful trees reaching high into the sky were towering over me, gently tossing in the wind and rustling their leaves. I found myself staring at them as I walked further and further into the forest, barely able to take my eyes off of them to watch where I was going. That's until something, tall and dark, caught my attention deep within the trees off the path. I squinted to try to make out the large object, but I couldn't discern what it was from where I was standing. Against my better judgment, I turned off the trail and started walking towards it. Curiosity had gotten the better of me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night unless I quenched my thirst for adventure. As I got closer, I found myself puzzled as I realized what I was looking at. A dark, colored, metal staircase leading to nowhere. I walked around the base of it to see if I could figure out what had become of the rest of the building. To my surprise, there was no evidence of any building ever being connected to this set of stairs. I chuckled to myself about what I just found, reaching for my back pocket to get my phone for some photographic evidence. I quickly realized that in my excitement to get out into the trails, I left my phone behind in the cabin. I figured it wasn't the best idea to be out here without a phone, so I turned back and found my way back into the trail to head back to the cabin. I hadn't realized how much the hike took out of me, so I took a shower and decided to spend the rest of the night just relaxing. The next morning, I woke up feeling energized, but I couldn't get the thought of that bizarre staircase out of the back of my mind. After making myself something to munch on, I laced up my boots once again, double checking to make sure that I had my cell phone this time, and I set out to get some pictures of my recent discovery so that I could convince myself that I hadn't just imagined the whole thing. After walking for quite a while, I started to feel defeated, unable to locate where I had found the staircase. As I began toying with the idea of heading back to the cabin to make myself something for lunch, a strange noise caught my attention from up ahead in the trees. I began to walk towards the direction of the sound, and soon enough, what had originally started off as a low humming noise had evolved into the rumbling tones of tribal horns being played in unison throughout the forest. The sound was growing loud. As I continued towards the source, a creeping feeling of dread began to pull in the pit of my stomach. I felt like I had been drawn into a state of hypnosis by the sound of the horns. I snapped back into reality, and there in front of me, the staircase. Somehow, I had made my way back to the foot of the mysterious staircase. At this point, the horns were sounding so loud that I felt as if I was being guided by a force beyond my own control. And I kid you not, I felt myself placing my foot on the first step of the staircase, slowly beginning to ascend against my own free will. I reached the top, feeling a cold sweat break out across my entire body, my heart pounding, but it felt as though I could not will my body to turn and leave. A deep sense of dread coursed through my veins, churning my stomach and making me feel weak as I was staring into the forest from the top of the stairs. And that's when I noticed the edges of my vision beginning to darken and fade. Only moments before I lost consciousness, I got a glimpse of a tall, dark looming figure standing in the trees, watching me from afar. Seconds later, I felt my legs begin to fold beneath me, and the sound of the horns faded to a peaceful silence. When I woke up, I was lying in my bed back at the cabin. Panicked, I reached for my phone in my pocket, checking the time, nearly midnight. My first thought was that I had actually come back from my hike early and had taken a nap, possibly having a nightmare in the process. My memory seemed hazy, and I was struggling to remember all the details. I dismissed my fear as being a part of my overactive imagination and the stress from my job working its way out of my system. I let out a sigh of relief and began to calm down. That's until I noticed I was still wearing my hiking shoes. I have been exhausted many times in my life, but never to the point that I would have worn my muddy hiking shoes to bed. A sudden and lingering feeling of being watched rushed over me as I remembered that the large panoramic window to my right remained fully uncovered and open to the inky black forest surrounding the cabin. My hands began to shake as I summoned my willpower to turn and face the darkness, assuring myself that there would be nothing there. To my despair, what I saw outside of that window against the backdrop of swirling darkness and moonlight was a tall, black figure, the head resembling the eyeless skull of a deer. Several sets of bony antlers twisted and snarl around the top of its head, framing the cracked and decaying bone and limply hanging jaw that composed the rest of its body. Its body seemed to be made of twisted branches and vines. I screamed, shuffling backwards and scrambling for my car keys on my nightstand beside my bed. I grabbed them, turning and bolting out of the cabin straight to my car, not even stopping to gather up my stuff. I turned the key in the ignition, and I was confronted with the terrifying creature standing straight ahead of me, fully illuminated by the headlights of the car. Without hesitation, I threw the car in reverse and spun around, speeding down the dirt road as fast as I could, and never daring to check my mirror. I didn't stop until I was back in my apartment. After making it back inside, I checked my phone to see if I was able to take any pictures so that I could show or tell anybody about what happened, without them thinking I was crazy. But there was nothing there. I'm still not sure exactly what I saw back there, or what it was that I discovered. But all I know for sure is if you ever find a staircase in the woods, turn and run away as fast as you can. So this happened in the summer of 2020. I live in Colorado, and me and my buddy were both laid off because of the you-know-what, and we decided to go on a 22 or so mile hike in the mountains. It was this fairly well mapped out trail that was at about 12,000 feet elevation, and we figured that we're going to be out there for 2 nights. The first night we're exhausted, but we're making good time. We hike a bit off the trail and we set up a campsite. We marked the area where we went off the trail, so we could find it again the next morning. Everything seems normal, so we go to get back on the trail that we marked, and we see this guy. We figure that he's homeless, but he's just sitting by a tree on the trail, waiting for us to come out. We try and talk to him, but there's no response. He just stares at us. Both of us were a little freaked out at this point. He looks like he's covered in dirt and possibly blood. We continue to hike and just leave him there, but we continue to keep our eyes peeled. The rest of the day is very uneventful. We have actually almost finished our hike, and we're going to set up camp mid-afternoon and just relax. We plan to smoke some weed, but before we do that, we still gotta find a place to set up camp. So eventually we go about 1.5 miles off the trail into the woods, and before we even settle in, this guy shows up again, just from out of nowhere, and whenever he walks by, he doesn't make a sound. We have no clue how he found us. We figure that he must have tracking skills. Also, we have no clue why, or how he even followed us for 9+ miles of rough terrain. No equipment or anything, especially without us knowing we were being followed. My buddy is enraged at this point. The guy just starts mumbling weird sounding gibberish under his breath. I can't even tell if it's English. We decided to leave the area, so we just hurry up and pack. The entire time, he is just standing there and watching us from 10 feet away. We finished the last bit of the hike in the light jog for like 4 miles. We're totally exhausted because of the elevation. We load up and we drive off, calling the nearest ranger station. We told them everything, but they didn't really seem to care. And if you're wondering exactly what he was saying, it was most likely incoherent stuff. But when he was just speaking nonsense, gibberish or whatever, I thought it sounded like he was speaking in some other language. He was mumbling a lot, so it was hard to tell, but it definitely sounded like there was a rhythm that I could make out sometimes, if that even makes sense. My friend, on the other hand, believes that this guy was possessed or being used as something, but God knows what. Always be careful when you go hiking or backpacking and you end up seeing the same person, well, the same stranger, twice in different locations. So I want to tell this story that I just remembered the other day. I'm still not sure what it was, but it sounds like what people in North America might call the Skinwalker, or some type of creature based on the stories that I have read. Now, I have told this story to other people, but here it goes. I would consider myself a kid back then. And by the way, this happened in the UK. So we go spend the summer at my uncle's place while he and my dad work on his house. My uncle lives with my grandmother and they have this huge house in the middle of the woods. It has a bunch of hills as well. As my dad and uncle work on the roof, I decided to go exploring in the gardens. A small clearing of land surrounds the house before it transitions into the thick woodland. I see a patch of no grass in this small area. I head over to see it, thinking that it was a log or something, but it happens to be a deer carcass, and it smells horrible. Deer are quite common in this area. I remember it. The flesh had been torn from nearly every bone, but from around the head. I start to feel a cold sweat and I just leave the area instead. I head back to the house. I climb up the roof using the ladder that was there, and I tell my uncle about what I saw. I remember him stopping as soon as I said that, and looking out towards the clearing that I was talking about. After a few seconds he says, "Don't worry about it. it's most likely a fox. Inside of my head, I'm like, a fox? Are you fucking kidding me? But I do shrug it off and go inside and call it a day. Sometime later, about 2 weeks or so go by. Me and my uncle and dad head down to a local DIY store one morning to get some tools and other things. I don't remember everything we bought. This is nothing unusual, and then we head back home and have lunch. As we're eating, my grandmother says that while we were out, she saw a weird shadow, almost like an animal walking around in our driveway. She said it looks like a big dog. However, its hind legs were longer than its front, but it was just a shadow to her, so she couldn't see it very well. And me at this age, this scares the fuck out of me, and I immediately think about what I found the other day. My uncle, who had been deep in the woods plenty of times, tries to say that it was most likely a wild cat, or like a black panther or something, and that could have been a reasonable explanation, as in the 1970s, owning large cats was banned in England, so many people just decided to abandon all the animals they had by letting them free into the woods. But there was no way a big cat would go so close to our garden, not to mention our driveway, as they are very timid as far as big cats go. So I spend the next week or so nervous that I can't even go outside half the time. So a few weeks after my grandmother had sighted the weird creature, I had forgotten all about it by this point, and so would everybody else. On the final week, I have to stay at my uncle's before he and my dad have a 4-month break. The woods surrounding the house are on the side of a steep hillside, which apparently is popular with mountain bikers. Me, my dad, and my uncle decided to go into the woods because, why not? And to see how well it is for mountain biking. I completely forgot about the previous events before this, like I mentioned. So we go in through a gate at the bottom of our driveway and head into the forest. The air is musky. It's really hot, like 30 degrees. And it's also pretty dark. So after about 30 minutes into this, we're deep within the woods after heading in one continuous direction up this hill. There happens to be plenty of ways that we can go, since they're all different directions that have been left by bikers. We stop to look at our map, and all of a sudden, we hear this loud sound, and we all turn to see a good number of deer sprinting like lunatics up the hill. I was too excited about exploring to give a damn about this, but I happened to see that my uncle actually looks concerned, and he says that it's a good idea to keep heading up the hill. We get to the top of the hill, and we're outside of the woods at this point. We stay up there for a while, and my uncle says that we're gonna head back down in a few minutes. We head closer to the woods and we smell this pungent smell, something rotting. I know there wasn't any sewers up here, so I know it had to be something. We decide to head back down, and my uncle digs into his bag and he pulls out this huge blade. He then says that when he saw the deer running, that he saw something else, and that it was standing upright and had the posture of a dog or a big cat on its hind legs. In my head, I'm freaking the fuck out. I'm remembering what my grandmother said on the deer carcass. I see my dad in the corner of my eye holding a what the fuck face and almost laughing, calling my uncle crazy. Also, as a side note, ever since another one of my uncles died, I have 5 of them. 4 years prior to this, my uncle, the one I'm with now, started to act a bit crazy. So it's starting to get darker, and we start heading into the woods all the way down. My uncle is getting crazy. He is starting to squat down, telling us to be silent and to keep our eyes out. The smell continues with us all the way down. After 15 minutes or so, we can see the exit to our garden, but something is off. The lights are on. This is strange for us because the lights on the outside of the house are motion sensitive, and since our grandmother never goes outside by herself, it means that something the size of a human must have triggered them. They got a cool down time of about 30 seconds if I remember correctly. A minute later, we hear the screeching sound from about 100 meters behind us. Everyone basically jumps out of their skin, turning around to see this lanky, crooked, dark humanoid figure, about 2 meters tall from what I remember. We all completely lose our shit and start to run towards the gate. All the while, throughout this whole time, I can hear this thing running towards us as well. We run through the gate as fast as possible. When the garden lights decide to switch off, we happen to be in the pitch black and can't see anything. My dad, who's been holding my hand since we started running, pulls me nearly off my feet as he suddenly changes direction. He reaches the house and the lights turn on. We turn around and see darkness. My uncle, who was halfway down the drive when the lights turn on so we could see around us, runs up to us and says that he could see it just behind some trees. But the lights dazed him, so he lost sight of it. After about 30 seconds, the stench begins to fade. We head back inside and talk to my grandmother. We ask if she's alright. She said she's fine, but that she could hear someone talking and knocking on the doors the whole time that we were gone. After a few seconds of silence, I ask what the hell was that thing. My uncle tries to explain the big cat theory, and that it was most likely a panther standing on its hind legs. In my head, I quickly say BS, but we don't say anything else after that. We did spend one more week there, and then my dad and I took off. The house that my dad and uncle worked on was just completed 2 years ago. But mind you, this happened around 10 years ago, and ever since that night happened, my uncle just loaded up on all weapons and went pretty crazy. He was also diagnosed with severe depression, and also some mild form of OCD soon after that as well. I guess that sight, combined with the death of his brother, really did fuck him up mentally. But as soon as he finished the house, he ended up selling it and moved into the local town. Also, as far as I know, how it looked, the most detailed description that I can give is that it had a human head. There were no antlers or anything like that. I'm not sure what the hell this was, but if anybody has any idea, let me know. Before I begin, I just want to let everyone know I'm going to be sharing some of the ceremonies that are done in the REZ. Some of the things in the ceremony are not to be talked about, especially ceremonies like the shaking tent ceremony or the evil way. Now you might be asking why. Why shouldn't these things be talked about? Simply because it's a personal journey for some people. If you want to learn about it or need healing, I would recommend to go visit one. It's not really something to be published or shared in such a manner. Be very careful when digging into these things. If you really want to find out, you'll learn that some of these things are not to be taken lightly. So this happened to me when I was a kid, more like a teenager, and it was at my grandma's house where I grew up that I saw my first true Skinwalker. I'll never forget that night, as long as I live. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved to go out and adventure and camp around in the hills behind my grandma's sheep camp, out on the eastern Navajo REZ. Every summer, when school was out, I would pack up my knife and all my scouting gear and head out to live with my grandparents for the summer, just so that I could learn how to be native and not so city-like, as my parents would always tell me. Mind you, I am Navajo. However, I'm not too familiar with the culture, as I grew up in the city itself. I love to go out and camp around in the hills behind my grandma's sheep camp, out on the eastern Navajo REZ. I would chop wood for the cooking stove, get water from the watering hole down the hill from my grandma's hoe gun, and also herd the sheep. I also like to go out and explore the surrounding hills and mesas, where I would also go out on my own to camp. And being that I was an All-American decorated Boy Scout from the big city of Albuquerque. So one July evening, I set out to the west to find a good campsite to have my summer adventures at, not knowing the bad luck the next few hours would bring. All I had taken with me was my survival knife, my gear, my radio, and my bag of goodies and dinner snacks that I would be cooking up later on that night. The sun was now setting, and I had to get to work on setting up my campfire. As I listened to my music, I gathered up firewood, chased some lizards, and 2 jackrabbits that got away from me. Too bad. They would have made a great dinner because, at that time, I was getting really hungry. It was all fun and games, and I loved it until that evening. As I was setting up a tent for my campsite and a place to put a small fire to roast marshmallows and hot dogs, I noticed someone with what seemed to be an old-style lantern doing something off in the distance. Out of curiosity, I moved in closer to get a better look, as it looked like they were burying something in the ground. Maybe they were burying a pet or some kind of treasure. A body? I hope not. Whatever it was. I was debating if I would tell my grandpa to call the Navajo police. With curiosity, I wanted to investigate what is going down the hill from where I was. Anyhow, it was weird to be doing such things at this hour, after the sun had set. I was told that Navajos don't do those things at night. Ever. As I got closer, I knew what it was the moment I saw it. By the soft dull glow of its light, I knew it was a Skinwalker. My heart stopped, and I'll be honest, I peed on myself a little bit. I so much wanted to scream for help. I knew if I did so, that thing would be burying me next to whatever it had just buried as well. So I just lay there silent for a long time after it went on its way, not wanting it to see or hear me. After a while, I took a good look around, making sure that the coast was all clear. After that, I made my way back up the hill, back to my tent, and prayed until I fell asleep, never once starting my fire. I didn't want it to see my fire, so I stayed quiet in the darkness the whole time. The spot I had chosen was perfect at keeping me in a hiding spot. The small rock wall was my wind barrier, as the other surrounding rocks kept my tent hidden from the Skinwalker. I was 2 miles from my grandma's place, and I didn't want to travel back in the darkness of the night with that thing lurking out. So I waited until sunrise. Then I went home after a quick nap. I was so tired from staying up all night, so when I woke up, I gathered my gear, covered up my fireplace along with my tracks, and ran back to my grandma's hogan. It was a little bit after midday when I finally got home. As I told my grandma what I saw, I got myself into more trouble by doing so. She and my grandpa were so mad at what I did and what I saw, so much so that my summer was now over, basically. I had to have a medicine man pray over me for 3 days and nights. It was known as a Navajo blackening ceremony, and it had to be done over me to chase away the evil that I had witnessed and got in contact with. What the medicine man told me next is something that I'll never forget. He said that the thing touched me while I was sleeping, and it also knew who I was. I guess when I woke up from my nap, I didn't notice the footprints it left beside me. Apparently, as I slept, it did its witching on me as well, and I thought they only did their evil at night. We later found out in another ceremony that thing was sent by a close family friend to my grandparents, and it was doing a witching towards them both to try to get their land and livestock from them. After finding all of that out, the medicine man had to do another ceremony. It was called the Evil Way, to send all that witchcraft back to the ones that were doing all the witching. After all was done, while he was packing up, the old Navajo medicine man told me a story about when he was my age. As he sat there eating a donut and drinking his coffee that my grandma made him, he told us how he would help his grandpa to do prayers and ceremonies for needful people at his grandpa's hogan. He said that one time, the first time that he saw a Skinwalker shapeshift in front of him, he and his cousin were chopping wood for the ceremony's fire when they noticed a strange shape coming up to the hogan. He said that they both screamed into the night as they both ran inside to tell his grandfather that a Skinwalker was coming to get them all. His grandfather just laughed and told the boys to calm down and not to be afraid, and that fear is what evil feeds on. He then told them to sit down and pray, and that no matter what, do not look at the evil or its face when it comes inside the holy place. Soon enough, this thing stepped inside the hogan and began to speak in Navajo to his grandfather. Its voice was very rough, and shaky as it said hello in Navajo. It continued to speak in a polite manner, and even introduced itself, and spoke of its Navajo clan. Then it got down on its knees, and begged for forgiveness. As this man, broke down and cried to the old medicine man, his grandfather patted the dark stranger on his head and back, blessing him with the smoke, the water, and the eagle feathers. They prayed for forgiveness, and they spoke of how the stranger would make a change into his new life. Then the old medicine man took some things and tossed them all into the fire, along with some cedar, to send the evil on its way back to the darkness. At that very moment, one of the visiting people in the meeting stood up and began to scream and curse at everyone in the room. With the eagle feathers in hand, the old man calmly splashed the blessed water into the deranged woman. At that moment, that person fell to the ground, ripped off her clothes, rolled into a ball, and crawled out of there. That was the first time I saw a naked woman, and to be honest, it scared me. The medicine man laughed to himself as he took a final sip of his coffee. He then said that they later had to track down where that witch had gone and take care of her and her witchcraft ways, basically meaning that they had to kill this woman, which was a skinwalker. After that story and that moment, well, it all sounds like adventurous fun and games, right? But as I later found out, it all comes at a price, a very dangerous price. But that's a story for another day. Addiction took our mom slowly. It rocked her through it, and it would sink her deep into sleep in the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7, and I kept them in a matchbox. The missing pieces of her kept safe, so she wouldn't be lost forever, so that maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell down around us, and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage, and the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters, the radiators would bleed rust. But it was still our house, and Annie would make it into a home. My sister Annie would mother me with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet. She always let me shower first so the water was hot, never complaining when she had to shower with cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tingles. Annie was dark-haired, like her father, whoever he was. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, just like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad, and I would give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her, sometimes. Keeping up with our mom was impossible, and we learned from a young age we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she would shine. She would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes, dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes when the weather was right, and she had enough of being drunk alone, she would call our school and tell them that we both had come down with summer sickness, and we would drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the backseat of the car coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her over our kitchen sink, and from behind, I couldn't tell who was mother and who was daughter. When she was drinking heavy, she would be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she would be gone a day or two. She would never tell us when. One day, we would just wake up to an empty house and the fridge packed full, with a post-it note on the front with a smear of Mom's lipstick and the outline of a kiss, telling us that she would be back home soon.
Sometimes she would bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays. Smoke up to the ceiling. Mom would be lost in the haze. We would sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music that would blast until the morning, and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food. She would chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the wall were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, with her knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet, and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seeds. When Mom drank too much was the worst. She would laugh too loud and too long at anything and everything until her mouth started to shake and she started crying at the breakfast table into her cereal. Annie shut down when Mom was like this. Went somewhere deep inside herself where nobody could harm her. She would stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on the TV, whispering the lines that she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5, I would cry when I would find my mom passed out cold on her bed, assuming that she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears, tell me she was only sleeping just like the princess in my storybook. We would sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would be the one to put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face and the vomit from her mouth, changing her clothes as she would piss herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October and I was 13. Annie was 16. It was a Wednesday night and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She had called us that morning from a payphone, with her voice slurring down the line, telling us she was having the best time with all her new friends, hoping that we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, that's when I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip glosses and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she got the money for them. We ate the birthday cake that she had made for me, with some sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness and the sea, and I enjoyed every bite and would scrape off sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her shitty phone as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she would just stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, me and Annie, we weren't speaking. Anger was hanging heavy between us, seeping through the floor. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I went down to pick her up, I caught a glimpse of her breath, warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. It was the smell of whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too. I couldn't watch her fall again and again. And just like Mom, I knew that she would never get back up. I stared down at her, blonde hair falling into her eyes, and all I could see was our mom. And then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turning loose. I ran for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, pieces of glass shining like we had dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them, pieces we could never put back. Outside through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold. I cried then, watching Annie on her knees picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things, even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, stomach turning inside my rib cage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food, not made in a microwave. She had set the table. Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, with every bite I would forgive her. Mom never cooked dinner, nor did she remember my favorite was spaghetti ever since I was a kid, or stay sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the darkness. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen as it was coming from far off, crying. I figured it was Mika, the 2-year-old next door, throwing a fit, loud enough for us to catch. Or maybe even Lucky, the cat that junkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around. But Annie always stopped me, saying that once he started giving, they would never stop taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we would sit outside and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized that she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up stories for the shapes that we could just pick out. Yeah, it's the course light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines, right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on the smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dreams will come true, Annie said. She stopped laughing, voice quiet, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish. So we did. Then, the sound of crying interrupted us. It was closer this time, and it was definitely human. We turned to each other, confused. Annie shrugged, and I squinted out into the black. It must be Mika, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe he walked around the back? Shit, do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply, and I sighed, rolling my eyes. Guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing, a promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her, smiling. It died on my face when I saw the look on her own. Get inside now. She was staring out into the dark past me, opening the door with one hand behind her. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I had found what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence was a person, crouched with their knees tucked up neat under the chin, arms wrapped around legs, their mouth hung wide, softly opening and closing as he cried, like a child lost in the dark, but as someone pretending, mimicking the sound, open and closed out in the blackness. Suddenly, they got straight, snapping upright, face still hidden by the black. They were tall and thin, too thin to be a normal person. Panic made me move. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We saw as the person slowly walked towards the house, with steps being deliberate and long. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around. I started to look over my shoulder out into the darkness. Annie grabbed my face hard, and shook her head. I knew then that she was being serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in. I looked down at our fingers interlocked, both of us grown from the same bones. I'm gonna call the police and everything is gonna be... Her voice stopped, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes, dripping like the promise of rain. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered. Her phone was upstairs, charging. That's when a soft, tapping sound filled the silence. Annie turned to the window, eyes becoming wide. It was the sound of someone's forehead against the glass. Slowly, over and over, they started to speed up, faster and harder, skin meeting the glass until they were slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. The tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and the loudest slam yet. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to break it. We ran upstairs, 2 at a time, skipping the ones caved in with dry rot on instinct. I turned behind me once, and Annie pulled my face back before I could see. The sound of broken glass echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom, locking the door. Crying sound trapped between the walls and the locked doors. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching the knife that she had grabbed from the kitchen. I was doing the same, shoulder to shoulder. Slow footsteps started on the stairs. The crying had become mocking, almost laughing sounds, shrill bursts of sound and then giggles, high-pitched and stopping before starting again. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the sound of it slamming open. It was looking for us. What the fuck is going on? I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that couldn't stop falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. It was Mom's room. The next room on the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, pressing hard enough on the blade to bleed. I watched my sister's blood drip down her wrist. A red road, still pushing into my hands despite the pain. I took the knife. Something slammed against the wall that was Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched sound then followed. I held my breath. I could feel my heartbeat in the base of my throat. I'm gonna get the phone from my room. I shook my head, ready to argue. Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand. I'm gonna get the phone, and I'm gonna call the police, and we're gonna be okay. I shook my head again. It's the only way. When I go, I need you to lock the door. You don't open it for anything or anyone. Promise me. I shook my head, and Annie pressed her hand into my mouth, crushing my teeth against my lips so it made my eyes water. Promise me, Em. Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair off my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. Promise. She mouthed and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, with the bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the black hall outside, and then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut, just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream followed, with the handle shaking up and down hard enough to pop one of the screws. I watched it roll towards me on the tiles, and then silence. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. Still silence. Nothing but me and my lungs slowly filling the room with my breath. Em, came a voice through the door. I was shocked. My hand started gripping the knife. Honey, what's going on? Mom? My voice cracked. Mom, is that you? I wrapped my arms around myself. shaking, trying to keep myself still. Sweetie, it's okay. Just open the door. Just let me in. The handle started shaking again, except this time it was more gentle. Just let me in. It's alright. She banged on the door and I took my handle off the bolt. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. Please. Her voice broke and she started to cry. Just let me in, sweetie. I'm so sorry. I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me like when I was a kid, and I would come in off the swings with a scraped knee. Maybe this time, she did mean it. Maybe it was all gonna be okay. And that's when my hand found its way to the boat. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. Emily, let us in. It's all okay. My hand froze on the bolt, and I tightened my grip on the knife. Annie never called me by my full name. That's when a hand banged on the door, with the handle rattling. Emily, let us in. Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. My mom was speaking now, pleading and crying, and the voice getting louder and louder. Let us in, let us in, let us in. Over and over again, punctuated by her fist on the door. I thought about demons and monsters, all the bedtime stories we pray don't crawl out from underneath the bed. That's not my sister, and you're not my mom. I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub and crawled into a ball, with the knife clutched to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that yelled at when I changed the TV channel, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural sound ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound, and then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covering my eyes, waiting to die. Somebody's arms found me and lifted me from the tub, carrying me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was carried downstairs. It was covered in long claw marks, dragged down to the floor. Pillows ripped apart covered the hallway, like it had snowed inside. I watched them slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms, and each of the rooms looked like they had been torn apart by something feral. Outside in our driveway were police cars and an ambulance. In the middle of it all was Annie, covered in blue and red lights as it washed over her, lit up in the dark like a neon angel. I threw myself from the shoulders of the cop and ran to her, holding us both together, broken pieces and all. Gentle screaming came from the ambulance, which was also rocking. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly that it made my chest ache as I understood. It turns out this was no demon, no wild animal or creature or bad man trying to break in. It was just Mom, out of her mind on alcohol and drugs and everything else in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together, no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time, and you never get back up. Annie had seen her in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her arms like unmapped roads, real thin and desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She had searched the kitchen for all the drink I had thrown away, and when she hadn't found it, she had come to hunt for the stash that she hid in the bathroom. She didn't want me, just the drugs on the other side of the door, and she was so high that she could mimic Annie's voice so perfectly. It turns out the real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that come in a bottle, or a needle, or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes, the monsters are the ones that raise you, or love you the most, but it's up to you if you let them in.
I had a dream. I'm not sure what it meant, or if it was real. Well, I know it wasn't real, but I'm pretty sure something was going on. Let me start this off by saying that I am deeply curious about the unexplained. Those topics don't often make appearances in my dreams, let alone to this level of detail. It was an unremarkable evening a few years ago. I can't recall any distress or commitments the next day that would have disrupted my sleep or dreams. And I also hadn't been drinking. I simply fell asleep at a normal hour, just like I would every night. The dream began with me asleep on the floor of a basement that I'd never been in before. It looked very familiar, but it wasn't a perfect match to any basement that I've been in. I then woke up wrapped in a blanket, an old flat pillow under my head. My back hurt and my eyes felt itchy. Even though I didn't have glasses on, I could see perfectly well after rubbing my eyes. The room was dark, except for a single blue light that I assumed was coming from a TV or a game console or something. All around me were other sleeping people that I assumed were friends of mine. They were all laying on the floor, but nobody was moving or made any noise. I glanced over to the stairs at the back of the room, and my blood ran cold. There was a strange figure, stocky and standing at about shoulder height, walking across the room. He was draped in what it looked like a purple bedsheet with yellow patterns on it. His skin was a dull brown-green, and his face seemed almost frog-like. He had front-facing white eyes, with no pupils and a long slit-like mouth. A long black beard hung down from his chin over his chest. He was wearing some kind of hat that curled backwards behind his head. His arms and fingers were long and thin, and protruded from his baggy sleeves. His movements were unlike anything I'd seen in my life. It was almost like someone moving underwater. I couldn't see his feet, so it looked like he was floating along the ground. His arms were moving very smooth at his sides as he quote-unquote walked. That's when he turned his head to face me, and that's when I heard his voice. "Can you see me?" I didn't hear a voice say it. It was like the words were in my brain, but I didn't put them there. I could tell they came from him though. I nodded. I was a bit scared, but I had this gut feeling that he wasn't dangerous, which is what actually kept me from panicking. In my head, I thought about what I was going to say, and was alarmed when he answered me in the same manner as before. "I can see you," I said. "What are you doing down here?" And he just repeated, "You can see me." "Yes, I can see you. Is everything alright?" There was silence. "Yes, don't be afraid." I stood up and walked over my sleeping friends towards him. As I did, I replied, "I'm not, but who are you?" His answer still lingers inside of me. "I am you, in a way. I control you. We are each other." Immediately, this strange warmness rose in my stomach. I was overcome with this feeling of joy and friendship. "So you control me, like a video game." I even did the hand movement of holding a controller for him, and he made a nervous laugh. "Not exactly. In a way, yes. It's hard to explain, but I'd rather not. But yes, it's nice to see you. People are how we experience. We live inside of you. We don't move around by ourselves." Another pause came as I tried to figure out what to say next. "I have to leave. It was nice seeing you, but you won't see me again." And with that, he was gone. No flash of light, no fading out. He was there 1 second, and gone the next. From there, I woke up in my bed. Nothing strange happened since then. No missing time, no marks or changes in my life. I just moved on, and sometimes I'll think about it.
but I have yet to see him again. I did tell this to a friend, and what he told me kind of stood out. When we're dreaming, we're in the spiritual side. This plus the fact that this thing is hideous leaves no other conclusion that you were having a talk with a demon that is possessing you. They're not supposed to be seen. That's why the demon was surprised. As for how it does control, this thing is whispering thoughts into your mind the same way that they communicate. Only when this is happening during the day, you have no way to know. Almost like when you tell yourself, these aren't my thoughts or what I'm thinking. I'm not sure what to think, but maybe those thoughts that we come across in our head sometimes isn't really us thinking about it. It might be somebody or something else inside of us, possessing us, putting these things in our head. I'm not sure if this is still correct, but I find it weird that science still hasn't found a solution as to why we dream. But there are several theories and explanations. But as far as why, nobody really knows. It's kind of scary when you think about it. What if the things that we dream are things that are happening in the spiritual realm? Be careful when you go to sleep tonight. My boyfriend and I were staying in a tiny home in Navajo Nation, right across from Monument Valley in 2019, that was solar powered. It was an Airbnb, and it was one of the last stops on a road trip through Colorado and Utah. There was an outhouse for a bathroom that you had to access by going outside. The area is very beautiful. The tiny home is on a cliffside with a spreading view of all of Monument Valley. Behind it are also large red rock formations with hiking trails. There's also a few homes around, but very spread apart. It has a strong energy about it, and there were some petroglyphs on some of the rock formations around the tiny home. We arrived in the early afternoon and settled in. As night was falling, my boyfriend called his dad to tell him that we had arrived, and also to let him know where we were. His dad had some experience in Navajo Nation, as he's come to the area before to do a sweat tent ceremony, and he told us he always felt off there, well, around the area that we were in. He then told us, watch out for those Skinwalkers, and we had both not heard about them before, so we just laughed to ourselves about him being fearful over something unreal. We got off the phone and my boyfriend started looking up a Skinwalker. After a few minutes, he looked over at me and said, well, the worst thing that happens is that we can die. And I kid you not, at that moment, all of the power in the cabin went out, completely. It was very dark, and this tiny home had huge glass windows showing the whole interior. While earlier it was beautiful because it showed views of the landscape, now it seemed very scary, almost like walking into a portal, into the unknown. So we were both scared to death, and of course, the only way to use the bathroom was to go outside, despite our efforts to contact the Airbnb owner, likely because of the late hour. Also, since we were only staying for the night, we decided it wasn't worth to make an argument. However, we both did sleep poorly that night. We tossed and turned, unable to find rest, and I swear, we would hear noises echoing outside. We didn't know what the noises were. We just ended up right next to each other, too afraid to even glance towards the windows for fear of what might be out there. We don't believe in the paranormal, which is why we laughed when my father-in-law said to watch out for Skinwalkers. Thankfully, nothing happened from there. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the big-ass windows, we spent no time in packing up our belongings, and I'll be honest, we didn't even bother brushing our teeth or using the bathroom again. We were just trying to get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible. However, as I was taking some stuff outside to the car, I saw a pack of feral horses standing right outside of our window. They weren't right next to the window, but they were across from it, and one of them felt like was staring into my soul. I went outside to take photos, and I felt like it was trying to lead me away back into the large red rocks. It truly felt like there was energy in that area. almost like it was reminding us that it was there, it's still alive, especially because we scoffed at it. Overall, it was a really cool experience, but it was a bit humbling and a little scary as well. After we left, my boyfriend called his dad again, and I won't forget what he said at the end. He said, "Whatever you think it was, you didn't see it, and you don't talk about it. Don't give them power." I grew up near the reservation. I also have 2 family members that are Navajo. There are some creepy things out there for sure. I felt things and I heard a lot of stories from my brothers. One thing that happened to me as a teenager was super creepy. We were driving through the REZ to get to Colorado for a concert. Out in the middle of nowhere, we saw an old woman walking on the side of the road. She was traditional Navajo, Digne, with a velvet skirt and her hair tied with a cotton string. I remember thinking it was a little weird that she was in the middle of nowhere and no houses were around, and that she was elderly. She looked at us as we drove past her. About 20 miles later, we saw her again and she looked at us, and it was the same lady. It did creep all of us out. It might be possible that she had a twin or something, but I'm good with faces, and it was the same woman. I do wonder what would have happened if we had stopped. All I know is that when you see somebody twice, it means something. Like either someone is trying to draw you. Like when you see the same dog or person twice, it might seem wrong that we didn't stop and actually offer her a ride. But growing up around the area, we knew it wouldn't have been appropriate. Plus our car was full. She didn't look like she was in distress or anything. And when we saw her again, none of us said anything for a while. We were all so creeped out. Her face was also blank. Not friendly or unfriendly, just blank. I told my brother, he's my husband's half-brother and is half Digne, and he said she was likely a spirit. I will add that he didn't think it was scary. He said that she was more of a guardian spirit. He is Navajo, and his father is very active in the tribe, and he was raised very traditional. All I know is that everybody in the reservation always says, if you see something that you're not supposed to see, you didn't see it.
I spent most of my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit, North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, that's where I drive up there to go hiking and camping. This time, I went up there with my family and stayed with them in Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off about 10 miles away at the Cold Mountain Trailhead, and I planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced at hiking or camping, but I had never camped alone. On top of that, I didn't bring a gun with me, something I won't go without now. On the way up, the trail was very tiring, not even steep. I hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like a ton of ups and downs and feeling like it wouldn't end. Eventually, it began to get darker, and I realized I needed to stop and set up right now that I still had light. So I stopped about half a mile short of the summit, and I figured I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot. I ate my food and went into the tent. At this point, I realized I hadn't ran into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon would be. I had trouble sleeping, and I lay awake for about an hour trying to sleep. During this time, as I was drifting away, I thought I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the footsteps. I brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag. The morning came, and I woke up and ate oatmeal. As I was eating, I looked over at my tent, and that's when I noticed a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries
tied with green cord propped against my tent. Inside of me, I was pissing myself, but I packed up all my shit and took off within 5 minutes. And damn right, I didn't even bother going to the summit. Instead, I went straight down. On the way down, I realized there was a pretty heavy fog, and I ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I was lost. I had to use a compass to eventually find the trail again, and I made it out with no other incident. However, I came to find out the same morning that a 27-year-old died on the same section of trail as me, and it's possible I would have ran into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. I have looked around, and his family seems to have scrubbed the internet of several of the articles on him. His name was Chad Seeger, if anyone cares to look him up. On many of the articles, people mention about getting lost on the trail and the fog. I'm not sure if there was some sort of connection with what I found beside my tent and Chad Seeger disappearing. What if there was somebody out there? Or something. I'm not sure what happened. But what if there was only 3 of us in that area? Me, Seeger, and whoever put this thing beside my tent. The scariest part for me was knowing that someone or something knew where I was and was watching me, and I had no clue about them.
I love camping, but after my most recent trip, I don't think it will ever be the same. I set up my tent on nice, flat ground and collected some wood for a fire. The night came with all its nightly sounds, and I relaxed at the owls and chirping crickets. Even better was the fact that no one else was around. Hell, it was subtle. I almost missed it. The voice came from deep within the woods, and for a moment, I didn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded almost like a female, but strange enough, I just couldn't tell. Please help. It continued. I shined my flashlight between the bushes and walked around. To be completely honest, even as a grown man, I was paralyzed with fear. So, I did the responsible thing and called the local police. That's when things went from being odd to very, very weird. The police actually told me to ignore it. I explained to them that someone could be injured and maybe needed medical attention, but they assured me otherwise. When I kept pushing and asked why, they told me, "Sir, if you ever hear that voice again, ignore it, do not respond, and do not approach." Well, I did hear it, again, but I didn't ignore it. It was almost midnight when I heard the voice a second time. I awoke to someone whispering, "Help," and it sounded like she was just outside my tent. I went outside to check and no one was there, but the voice continued from a distance. "Help, please." Again, I grabbed my flashlight and looked around the area I was camping. I was too afraid to follow the voice into the woods, especially since the authorities themselves avoided it. But I struggled morally, trying to decide whether I should go and help this person or listen to the police, who were concerned for my safety. But then, I heard another, different voice. This other voice, which also seemed to be coming from the woods, was an octave lower. Unlike the first one, which cried for help, this one was loud and demanding.
"Quiet.
The other voice demanded.
No one's going to help you."
Once I heard that, I was pretty sure someone was in trouble, so I called the police again. When I informed them about a second voice coming from the woods, they seemed even more concerned. They told me that I should pack up my things and leave the campsite immediately. They said that hearing the second, more manly voice meant that it was getting desperate. They also said that the two voices were coming from the same person. That part was bizarre and confused me, to say the least. It was at this point I dismissed the police in that area as crazy, but not before telling them off. I got angry. I told them that if they didn't get down here to come and check it out, then I would do it myself. I said that a woman could be in serious trouble and that it was their job to help her, but they still refused to come. All they kept repeating to me over the phone was, "Do not enter the woods, sir." They actually seemed more afraid than I was. Once I hung up the phone, I heard the voices again. A gentle, "Please, somebody help me." And then, a growling.
Quiet. No one's coming.
It was a little past midnight at that point. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I had the chance to save someone's life, but instead became a coward. So I grabbed some things and ventured into the woods. When I entered the woods, the voices ceased. Just like that. No cries, no whispers, and no commands. Even the owls and crickets went away. Nothing but dancing leaves and creaking tree branches. I stopped walking and looked around, a full 360 degrees. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out. Nothing. "I'm here to help," I continued. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Still, nothing. I thought of calling the police again, then chuckled to myself. I found it strange, but somewhat comforting that I didn't find anyone out there. Regardless, I was still creeped out. So I packed my things and finally left the campsite. I didn't know why the police, of all people, were so afraid. Worst case, someone was in actual danger, and we all failed them. To be honest though, when I heard the voice the very first time, I did think it was a joke. When I heard it the second time, along with that other voice, I became a bit more concerned. And same with the third time I heard it in the woods. However, when I heard it again, for the fourth time, a week after I left the campsite, coming from inside my own house, I became very, very concerned. Before I start, I feel like I should let something very clear. I love Ellen. We've been living together for about 3 years now. In fact, we were childhood friends. And I know this may sound like a fairy tale to some people, but it truly felt like we were always destined to be together. Even after graduation, when we started dating other people, it only felt truly right when we were with each other. So I don't know what took me so long to ask her out, but I'm really glad that I did. We have the same taste in music, in movies, and even food. We laugh at the same dumb jokes, and we know exactly how to comfort each other in times of need. She's the kindest, most gentle, and loving girl I ever met. We even been talking about our plans for marriage, and how we would like to have kids of our own. And this is why it hurts so much how it all went terribly wrong in just 4 nights. I would also like to say that Ellen doesn't have much of a family other than me, and some very distant aunts that she never met, and that she doesn't even know their names. I was born in a big family, with 4 siblings and plenty of cousins that were always visiting us, and even helping out when we got in trouble. Ellen has none of that. She doesn't have any siblings, and her father was an alcoholic, abusive freak that died when she was young. Her mother was a very kind and inspiring person that took care of the family by herself for many years, and almost a second mother to myself, you can say. So when she passed away last year, It hurt us both for a long time. But Ellen stays strong. She's not the type to let her feelings easily surface. So you gotta be a lot more perceptive to get what she truly feels. I used to pride myself in being capable of that. I felt like I knew her better than I knew myself. That's why this is all so strange, and frankly, terrifying. We were sleeping in bed, and I was dreaming. I don't remember what it was about, until I heard her voice very close to my ear.
Knock, 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 knock.
She was caressing my hair, gently while sitting in bed, and looking below at me. I slowly opened my eyes, groggy from sleep. Hey, what is it, babe? She kept looking at me and repeated,
Knock, 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 knock.
I looked over at the digital clock on top of the dresser. 3:27 a.m. I had work in only a few hours. Hey, what is it, Ellen? She paused for a second.
Knock, 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 knock.
Fine, I accepted, mostly because I was expecting some kind of surprise. Ellen wasn't the type to do what she was doing for no reason. Who's there? Her smile opened up, and she answered.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
I kept looking at her, dumbfounded. Is that it? Is that the joke?
Yes,
She said, laying in the couch and covering herself with a blanket.
thank you for answering.
Weirdo, I answered, closing my eyes and going back to sleep. The next morning things went as normal. I only remember the strange conversation while I was alone in the bathroom, brushing my teeth. I wasn't even sure if it had truly happened, or if it was just a weird dream. So we had our breakfast together, and she was acting normal, reading something from a fashion magazine. Frankly, I wasn't paying much attention, so I took the opportunity to ask about last night. Initially, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Then, she fixed her eyes on me, and the same smile from last night crossed her face, just briefly. And I knew it wasn't just a dream. She told me it wasn't anything important, and she stopped paying attention when I started asking more. And even though I shouldn't, I gave up. I had work and other matters to attend to, and I just brushed off the weird event, thinking it wouldn't happen again. But the following night, I woke up to her voice.
Knock, knock,
A pause.
knock, knock.
What is it now? I said. Ellen, what are you doing?
Knock, knock.
She repeated. This time, she wasn't even touching me, just sitting in bed, looking at me with that same smile, but her eyes seemed larger, and she blinked in longer intervals. I looked at the clock, and once again, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, come on. What is it? I got work in a few hours. I can't be waking up in the middle of the night to answer some knock-knock jokes.
Knock, knock.
This is getting creepy, you know. I'm not sure if this is some kind of joke you've been doing, but I don't like it.
Answer it. Knock, knock.
I sighed, but also let a small laugh escape. It was creepy, of course. She was my Ellen, but it didn't bother me as much as it should. Alright, fine. Who the fuck is there? I answered in a playful tone.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
For some reason, I felt a chill down in my spine. It was the same answer as before, and I still didn't get what it meant. But the way she said it, with a strange, monotone voice, contrasted well with her smile and the fact that I had no idea what she meant by that. What does that mean? I asked. I really don't get it. She just smiled and went back to sleep. The next day, we talked again about what was happening. She was starting to ignore my questions, and I barely got her to say anything. It was almost like she couldn't talk about it, which was very off, considering we talk about pretty much everything. I told her I needed to be well rested for work, something she should understand well, and wasn't liking her little gag every night, as I didn't want to hurt her feelings. When I got back home, we had dinner, we watched the movie, and went to bed.
Knock, knock.
I opened my eyes faster this time around. In fact, I barely got any sleep. I just knew she would do it again, and kept thinking about it the whole time. I glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m.
Knock, knock.
I thought about ignoring her, just pretending I was asleep, and she wouldn't wake me up. So I closed my eyes slowly, hoping that she hadn't seen me opening them in the first place, and stayed quiet.
Knock, knock.
She continued. She didn't stop. I controlled my breathing, but she kept going.
Knock, knock.
I'm not answering your fucking joke, Ellen. Stop it.
Knock, knock.
I ignored, but she kept going. She had never been this insistent with anything before. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting on my nerves. And frankly, I felt scared. Why the fuck was Ellen doing this? Why every night? And at the same exact time down to the minute? Why wouldn't she let me sleep until I answer her?
Knock, knock.
I got up in a sudden movement. Ellen, god damn it. I was ready for a discussion, but when I finally glanced at her, it was almost like everything was drained from me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking. Just staring right at me like an animal. And her mouth was moving slowly, and she didn't stop.
Knock, knock.
I didn't know how to react or what expression I had when I saw her, but my heart skipped a beat. It was terrifying, as if her gaze froze me in place. 1,000-yard stare.
Knock, knock.
Who's there? I asked, feeling as if it was the only way out of that fucking nightmare.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
Ellen slowly closed her eyes and lay down. I kept staring at her while she fell into what seemed to be a deep sleep. I got up and left. I walked downstairs and sat down at the couch in the living room, staring at the night sky outside and soaking the quietness of the neighborhood. My heart was beating fast and it didn't slow down. I was too scared to sleep in the same room as my girlfriend, all because of a fucking knock-knock joke. But it was unnatural. I thought about calling someone. I thought about it all being some kind of sleep-related issue, such as some type of sleepwalking, but it didn't make any sense. I felt so tired, and decided that early in the morning, I would call an old friend who's a psychologist and get the opinion of a professional. I knew something was wrong with Ellen. I stayed in the couch as the day rose, and once Ellen woke up, she was acting normal again. Even asked me why I wasn't in bed. I didn't answer. In fact, I didn't talk to her and simply left for work. She seemed very upset, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Once I got to work, I called my friend. I told him everything that was happening, with every single detail as I'm describing right now. He didn't seem as worried, but we agreed in making an appointment for next week. Now, I just needed to convince Ellen to come with me. I received plenty of text messages from her. She seemed very worried, sad, and even confused. She apologized a lot, and it broke my heart a little bit. I felt bad. I shouldn't have, but I answered her and made her promise it wouldn't happen again. I also told her about the appointment, and she hesitated for a moment, but she agreed to go with me, so we made up. This was Ellen, after all, the girl I knew ever since I was 6 years old, the woman I loved, that had taken care of me for many years, and as much as the strange behavior creeped me out, she wasn't actually doing anything scary or even dangerous. So for a while, I convinced myself I should give her another chance. When I returned home from work, we stayed together. She even got my favorite meal ready. Ellen was acting as gentle and caring as I always remembered, and I slept with her in our bedroom, even though I didn't want to.
Knock.
I couldn't believe it. She fucking promised me she wouldn't.
Knock.
I gazed at the clock. 3:27 a.m.
Knock.
I was laying on my stomach, and I couldn't see her face. In fact, I didn't even bother to look at her. I was feeling more sad than scared at this point. Sad that she had broken her promise,
Knock.
Who's there? I answer, determined to just go back to sleep.
Not me, so don't answer the door.
I stayed quiet and I closed my eyes. I just hoped I would be able to handle it until the appointment next week. To my surprise, I was actually able to sleep. Maybe because I hadn't been able to rest since last night. The following morning, I went back to not saying anything to Ellen, only very limited responses. I was expecting her to act same as yesterday, trying to apologize, but she didn't. Mostly she didn't even say anything, almost as if she had accepted it. She also looked tired, or at least a bit weak. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I didn't receive any messages. Once I got back, we had the most silent dinner I ever had in my life. She barely ate anything. I decided to let her have the bedroom, and I would end up sleeping on the sofa. I wasn't sure if it would stop her, but I held on to the hope that she wouldn't go downstairs, only to tell me the same fucking knock-knock joke again. I covered myself with a blanket, shaked off the uneasy feeling, and tried to get some sleep. I had a deep sleep, without dreams. I felt like I was lost in darkness. Then, I heard somebody. I opened my eyes, and I saw Ellen, standing above me, looking at me with big eyes and dilated pupils that didn't seem to belong in such a completely neutral expression, watching me sleep. I almost screamed in fear, jumped out of the couch, and her eyes followed me as I stumbled across the dark room, creating distance between us. For a moment, I was able to glance at the clock above the table, 3:27 a.m. "Ellen, what the fuck are you doing?" I asked, desperate, but she didn't move. In fact, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, as if I was made of glass and she could see right through me. Then, I heard a knock on the front door. I looked over in that direction, and it was followed by another knock, and another. Someone almost pounding at the door. I glanced back at Ellen, and she was still staring at me. Slowly, I got closer to the door and she didn't move. The pounding continued. "Who's there?" I screamed. It stopped, and then I heard a voice.
John? John, can you hear me? Open the door, please. John, please, open the door.
I froze in place. The voice kept calling me, but I couldn't believe it. It was Ellen's voice, coming from the other side of the door. But it couldn't be.
I beg you, John, open the door. She's not me.
Slowly, I turned my head to look at Ellen, standing in front of the couch, and she was looking at me with the same eyes and a terrible, wide grin across her face. The pounding continued.
John, open the door, please.
I stayed still, not knowing what to do. And then, I don't remember what happened after that. I just woke up in my bedroom. The digital clock indicates 4:21 a.m. Ellen isn't by my side. I'm completely alone. I'm trembling uncontrollably, and I'm not sure what's going on. I don't remember what happened after I saw her terrible grin. I'm not even sure if I opened the door. I tried to look for my phone, see if I could call the police, or at least someone that I know, but I left it downstairs. All I have is Ellen's laptop, and it's where I'm writing this right now, to get some sort of advice, because I know I can't go downstairs. Everything is dark, very dark, almost as if the shadows are leaning into the room, and I can also hear a low, scratching sound. What should I do?